From the muddy banks of the North Saskatchewan River, right here in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. This is Jack Antonio on the line for Do You Know Jack, the podcast. And on the line with me today, I have author Steve Bergsman, who has just completed a very fascinating tome on a very, very fascinating individual. The book is called I Put a Spell on You, The Bizarre Life of Screamin' Jay Hawkins. Just came out a few weeks ago, July 2nd, 2019 on Feral Health. Steve, how are you doing, my friend?
Excellent. And how are you doing in Upper Canada, I guess it is, right?
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of weird because for years I lived in Yellowknife, of course, and I know that you've you know got your own story to tell about getting up there. But you know, recently, of course, maybe about a year ago now, I moved down to Saskatchewan, to Prince Albert. But up in Prince Albert, they consider this northern Saskatchewan, and I'm like, no, this is not north. You know, I'll show you north. You can come and see the Northern Lights with me in Yellowknife. Well, now listen, Steve, I guess the operative question is, just having done, you know, a bit of research here on yourself, the author. I mean, how does a real estate author go from, you know, being a real estate mogul of sorts to writing books on interesting and obscure R&B singers?
Well, I've been a business writer for, I don't know, 30 years at least.
Right.
And so the real estate books came easy to me, but I've always also been a musicologist. And the first R&B singer, I should say the first obscure R&B singer I wrote about was Johnny Ace.
Yes.
Who was a very important singer in the early 50s. And we don't know much about him because, according to the rumor, he killed himself playing Russian roulette around Christmas 1954.
Yeah.
And but he had a lot of number one R&B hits on the charts before then, and he was probably the most popular R&B singer in America up till that point.
Yeah.
In fact, after he offed himself, his song. I can't think of it at the moment, but My Pledge of Love. No, that's a different song. This is what happens when you write too many books, I'll tell you that.
Indeed. Well, a quick Google search will probably find what his big song is.
Yeah. Well, anyway, after he killed himself, that song became his biggest selling record.
Right. Is it Pledging My Love? Is that the one?
That's it. I'm glad there's somebody out there who still has brain cells.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like you said, when you delve and dive so deeply into you know, a wide range of musical subjects, I'm sure at times it's hard to separate one from the next.
Yeah, it does get a little confusing, especially since most of the people I write about are all in the same period of time, the 50s and early 60s. So I'm overlapping a lot.
Yeah. Well, now, I think my curiosity from a musical standpoint is, you know, when we talk about 50s R&B, I mean, this is sort of roughly the precursor to what would later, you know, evolve into rock and roll. Am I right?
That's correct. R&B bubbled up in the 1940s, and the first pre-rock and roll records probably date back to around 47, 48 with Good Rockin' Tonight and songs like that. And then that by 1955, 1956, that became rock and roll. And there's the period of time where we were introduced to Screamin' Jay Hawkins.
Right. So I know there's a bit of a story to tell about, you know, Mr. Hawkins. I mean, I think what's your passion and motivation behind, you know, researching Screamin' Jay, though, yourself?
Well, actually, it came out of left field. On Facebook, I was contacted by a gentleman named Mike Armando.
Right.
And Mike played backup in Screamin' Jay Hawkins. He was in the backup band to Screamin' Jay Hawkins in the 1970s. and he wrote me. He said, "You really should be writing about Screamin' Jay." And like most people, I only know Screamin' Jay by the one song, "I Put a Spell on You." Of course, I knew of his act where he came out of a coffin to sing the song.
Yeah.
So he was quite well known. But I said, I said, Mike, well, I'm working on some other books. But eventually I got around to looking at Screamin' Jay and saw what an interesting and fascinating character he was. And I wrote Mike back. I said, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to write this book.
Uh-huh.
And that was the beginning of "I Put a Spell on You: The Bizarre Life of Screamin' Jay Hawkins."
Yeah, well, and I think now, in the various different, reviews and the researching, of the man himself, I mean, some people consider him the very first shock rocker, which, is an interesting subject in and of itself.
I mean, people say that there really wouldn't be a Kiss, or there wouldn't be an Alice Cooper without Screamin' Jay Hawkins sort of pioneering these sort of what we call shock rock now.
Yeah.
But in his early days, besides coming out of a coffin, he'd dress up in bizarre outfits. He'd have smoke bombs on stage. He always sang with a cane with a skull on top. So he had all this outlandish stuff that he would do. But the first people to sort of copy his act were the Brits. So there was an act called "The Crazy World of Arthur Brown," who had a #1 hit called "Fire."
Yeah.
And he just copied all the smoke and the pyrotechnics of Screamin' Jay. And then we get to America with Kiss and Alice Cooper.
Yeah. Now I wonder, just out of random curiosity, having not researched that aspect myself, if, Screamin' Jay even would have been on the radar of somebody like Alice Cooper.
The odd thing is Alice Cooper lives here in Arizona, but I've never bumped into him. So if I ever do, I'll ask him that very, very question.
Yeah, well, I mean, chances are, there was a bit of an evolutionary process where, maybe the spark would have come from Screamin' Jay, but, other people, like you said, would have copied him to the point that, maybe Alice was influenced by somebody that was influenced by. Yeah,
well, nothing sort of comes out of spontaneous eruption, you might say, like a volcano. In the arts, including music, it all evolved.
Yeah.
And I always think that even the name Screamin' Jay Hawkins, he saw that guys like other blues singer, Big Joe Turner. So if you have a Big Joe Turner, why can't you have a Screamin' Jay Hawkins? So he picked up. He probably ripped off the style of nickname from someone else himself.
Yeah.
So it's all an evolution.
Right. Right. Now, I mean, I guess, moving on to the book, having, leafed through the pages and read sections of it, I mean, it seems like your mantra here is, this is kind of a deconstruction of the man, because he was prone to telling a number of tall tales about his life. And in this book, you kind of debunk a lot of that, so to speak.
Well, yeah, it was hard to separate fact from fiction with Screamin' Jay, because not unlike our current president here, whenever he spoke, there was generally a lie involved.
Yeah.
So, and that was truly the case when he spoke about himself. So he always had all these great and grand stories about himself, and most of them, maybe there was a germ of truth in it, but you sort of had to write the biography. You sort of had to figure out, okay, what was real and what was just his interior fantasy life, and that's why I had to debunk so much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess now, just thinking about, Jay and a lot of that mythology, I mean, were you concerned that the debunking of a lot of this stuff might take away from his legacy, Steve?
No, I thought it made him more interesting. I thought he was truly a unique personality, one of the really few that were out there, at least in the 1950s, and that was all part of his craziness, you might say.
Yeah.
So we could call it debunking, and yes, that's what I did. But it sort of made him like, boy, this guy was truly a bit weird.
Yeah, well, I mean that's probably quite a grand understatement. Well, now we've talked about this, deconstructing of Jay's life with surgical precision, and I think a big part of the book was that you were able to sleuth out a lot of interviews and past articles. But I think along the way you also managed to get hold of one of Jay's daughters, if I'm not correct. I mean, how difficult was that to achieve?
I knew he had a daughter that was still alive, and a son that was still alive, and I thought he had three children by his first wife.
Yes.
Now, and I thought they were all still alive, but one of the daughters had passed away.
Uh-huh.
And I could never find or get a hold of the son, but I did get a hold of the daughter, and I did get a hold of his original sister-in-law. He grew up in Cleveland.
Right.
So his original sister-in-law, when in his first wife, he was married 6 times.
Uh-huh.
So he had a very healthy sex life, you might say.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, he did claim he had something like 55 children, although I don't believe it was anywhere near that. But that was one of his claims anyway.
Yeah, I think you estimate maybe it couldn't have been more than 15 if my information is correct.
Yeah, and maybe even that was an exaggeration. I was thinking, well, figuring the kind of the lifestyle he led and all the travel and everything, if he got to 15 children, that's still a lot. But the numbers at 55 or even 85 that some people had said, that was all part of the great Screamin' Jay mythology.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well now let's just talk about your process a little bit. I mean, you have access to some of Jay's family members and a few of his band members, and of course probably scads of interviews. I mean, where did you start when it came to finally getting the pen to the paper, Steve?
Well, I started with Mike Armando because he was the one that came to me and said, "Here's a great story." So the first person, even when I wasn't sure I was going to write the book, I interviewed him, and he had enough interesting stories that made me think, okay, here's the book I'm going to proceed. So Mike Armando was my starting point. And then Mike was able to put me in touch. Well, he gave me the names of people that he knew had played with Screamin' Jay at one time or had promoted Screamin' Jay at one time that were still around. So that was interesting. Yeah. And then I would pick up odd names, like there was a woman who was an exotic dancer who was both a girlfriend to Little Richard and Screamin' Jay, and who's still alive. So, and I was able to find her. That was interesting. I was able to find her.
Yeah.
And she's living I would say a marginal existence in California. She has some health problems now. And then she put me in touch or gave me some names of people that I should talk to as well, because she had known Screamin' Jay since the 50s. So, and she has interesting stories to tell as well. Yeah. It was odd. There were still a lot of people, probably 80 years old or greater, that were still around.
Yeah.
Not a lot. I should take that back. There were a few, who were 80 or better, who were still around and still could talk about Screamin' Jay.
Yeah, well, and I mean that's partly a blessing and a curse of the internet, is it becomes easy to track down old interviews, magazine articles, newspaper clippings, I would imagine, and also performance footage. I saw just today, I was just checking some things out, and I saw a performance of Screamin' Jay on Arsenio Hall that was one of the wildest and weirdest things that I've ever seen. I mean, in your travels, did you watch a lot of the video clippings that are so accessible now on the internet as part of your research process?
Well, the internet certainly makes it easier for an author, and part of the great thing, there was besides the video, there was a documentary on Screamin' Jay,
right?
And I could find there were at least 2 documentaries on Screamin' Jay. And I could find in full both those documentaries and watch them. So the stuff that's on the internet, it really makes my job easier. Uh-huh. And sometimes you could find people through social media. Like I found a woman who was purportedly his daughter, but she didn't want to talk to me. Sometimes you find people and they don't want to talk.
Yeah.
So that happens a lot. There was a guy I found. So Screamin' Jay, his real name was Jallacy, Jalacy, Jallacy J. Hawkins.
Yes.
And there was a Jallacy J. Hawkins Jr. or something I found, who I assumed was Screamin' Jay's son, but he didn't want to talk to me either.
Yeah, well, now I think part of part of Screamin' Jay Hawkins, legacy, I suppose, is that he wasn't very favorable with his children, if I'm understanding correctly. So maybe that's why a few of them just wouldn't want to bother.
Yes, that's true. So the story from his daughter that did speak to me is that one day she's sitting on the porch of the house. She sees a father who says, "Well, I'm going out to the corner store," and doesn't come back for 2 years.
Yeah, I do recall reading that in the book. The other thing that I was just curious about yourself now, having delved, probably taken a very deep dive into the man's music. I mean, what to you, apart from maybe I put a spell on you, I mean, what's your what's your favorite, or maybe some of your personal favorite Screamin' Jay Hawkins tracks?
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm really ambiguous about his oeuvre, because there's "I Put a Spell on You," which is really one of the great seminal rock and roll tunes, and I think it's been recognized as such.
Yes.
And I have a hard time really pinning down what's really good with his other tunes, because the problem was so the original recording of "I Put a Spell on You" was filled with all these antics and weird sounds that he would make. He gargled and gurgled and grunted, and it was all very atmospheric. It made the song, but he could not get out of that bag, you might say. Once he did it, then almost every song had to have it, whether it really deserved it or not. So you go back to maybe I Put the Whammy on You or something, which are good songs, but then there's the famous Constipation Blues, which everybody knows, everybody knows because it's really one of the grossest songs ever written. But I think it's terrible. Frankly, do you really want to hear a song about somebody who has constipation problems?
Complete with grunts and groans and a simulated toilet flush. Yeah.
Yeah. So does the world really need that song? Now, I may be the lone wolf here, because it's a popular song, Constipation Blues. And when people think of Screamin' Jay Hawkins, they go, "Oh, Constipation Blues. What a great song that is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that actually comes up very briefly in that clip of Screamin' Jay on Arsenio. Just very briefly, Arsenio brings it up. Did you actually? Basically, he wanted confirmation that this is pre-internet days. He wanted confirmation that Screamin' Jay had even written a song like that, and he, very humble. Surprisingly, Screamin' Jay says yes. As a matter of fact, I did.
Well, Screamin' Jay really was a prolific songwriter. I mean, some of his albums, he penned every song.
Yes.
So he was a prolific songwriter. He just got caught up in that one thing that he did that was successful, and he couldn't drop it. He also, I should add, he liked to sing some of the classic tunes from the 40s, and he was very good at it. But he sang those for himself, and I don't think people really migrated to those songs. They really migrated to his more outlandish stuff. But he did like to sing, and we put him on. He would put those songs on his album. These are classic tunes from the 1940s, old big band stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've Got You Under My Skin is one that I've heard of his.
Yeah, and the other thing so we know I Put a Spell on You, this crazy song that he wrote, and but it was really adaptable, and so you get the Nina Simone version, which is a jazzy, bluesy, slow number, or you get the swamp rock version by Creedence Clearwater Revival, and there's been, there's somebody still every day. I think somebody records a different version of "I Put a Spell on You." Yeah. So it's really an adaptable song. Occasionally, we hear some other of his seminal songs, but not many. It's that one song that so overwhelms everything else that the people, don't, as you said, deep dive into his bucket of songs there.
Well, listen now, like I said off the top, this book, I Put a Spell on You, The Bizarre Life of Screamin' Jay Hawkins, came out on Feral House July 2nd. The author on the line with me is Steve Bergsman, and I think you've got another project potentially in the works now. Am I right? You've got some girl group thing going.
Yeah, I just about a month ago, I contracted to a book with another publisher, and it's on the New Orleans girl group, the Dixie Cups.
Yes.
And that book tentatively is called Chapel of Love and Hate, the story of the Dixie Cups. And Chapel of Love, of course, was their big number one hit, considered one of the greatest girl group songs of all time, and Rolling Stone considers it one of the greatest rock and roll songs of all time. So Chapel of Love and Hate, and that I think will come out next year. Matter of fact, just before you and I spoke, I sent the manuscript off to the publisher. So that's how close we're running these things. Is
it Feral House again that's going to do this one?
No, that's the University of Press, University of Mississippi.
Ah, okay.
They really wanted that book, and I said that's fine. So that's where that one's going. That's going to be an interesting book because I really think the girl group era is underappreciated.
Yeah.
And there was these poor young girls. They were all these when they got started, or when they were tapped for stardom, or when they sang. They were all pretty much teenagers, not knowing anything about the business. They literally just got out of high school. Yeah. Sometimes they didn't even graduate high school before they were tapped. And they were seriously and badly exploited in every way you might think.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the dark side of what were very lush, cheery, romantic records.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now, do you have a website, Steve, where we can find out more information about yourself and your many books?
I don't have a website anymore because I've dedicated myself to social media. So most people find me or my books on Facebook, and there's a Facebook site called the R&B Set.
Okay.
And that covers at the moment all my books on rhythm and blues singers.
Uh-huh.
And it could be a website, but it's very informative, and thousands of people come and friend me on that page, and that's usually where people contact me.
Such as myself.
Yeah. So you found me.
Yeah, I did for sure. And I'm glad that you interact with your readers and your fans, because that's so important in this day and age. You got to get out there and pound the pavement and press the flesh, so to speak.
Which I try to do from my little abode here in Arizona.
Right on, right on. Well, listen, man, it's truly been a pleasure and an honor chatting with you about all things Screamin' Jay, but also of course the artistry behind your books. And I'm glad I got this opportunity, man. It's been fun and it's been enjoyable.
Well, thank you very much for calling.
Right on. You have a good day.
Bye bye.